All right, welcome everyone to TrueFire's Jazz Blues Camp. It's going to be a good camp tonight. I hope you brought your sleeping bag and you're ready to just snuggle in with us for some jazz blues. It's going to be a fun time. We've got amazing artists. We've got three great TrueFire educators. We've got David Hamburger, Tim Lerch, and Frank Vignola. They're going to be sharing lots of cool stuff with us. I'm Jeff Sheets, Director of Education at TrueFire. We're really glad that you're here. Now, how this is going to work is each artist has got their set where they're going to go over some material. If you RSVP'd, that means you got the link to be able to check out the original lessons, but they're going to show you some variations, some new ways to look at that material. They're going to go over that and answer any questions you have. Now, the really cool thing about this format is we're doing this live. But after this is all done, we're putting this all together and creating a TrueFire course, something that you can download, you can play in the TrueFire player. You'll have slow-mo, looping, tab sync, the whole works. So we're going to tab out all of their new variations that they're sharing with us tonight. So we have tab for all of that stuff. And if you click the link that you're going to find here for pre-order, you can actually pre-order this tonight during this event for, I think, 50% off. So basically half price. You can buy the pre-order, and then when this comes out, probably in about a month, you'll be alerted and you'll be able to download this whole thing. All of it put together, all the tab, all the jam tracks, all the cool stuff. So that's how this is going to work. We're going to jump right into this with one of a long time TrueFire educator. This guy was around maybe when I was around in the early days of TrueFire. David Hamburger has been, he's done so many courses at TrueFire. Of course, he's very well known for his fingerstyle blues guitar playing, has amazing courses with that. But equally amazing is his electric blues playing. And he's very knowledgeable about all styles of blues, but he has really got this hip jazz blues thing that, we're going to dig into tonight, and he's going to talk a little bit about that. But without me talking anymore, let's just jump in and welcome David Hamburger. How you doing, man?
Hey, Jeff, how's it going?
It's going great, man. How you been?
Uh, well, everybody in my family is like, well, how are you guys doing down there in Austin? What's it? And I'm like, being quarantined is really no different than an average day if you're a musician like me. You're just
Right,
on your
right.
own, doing your thing, trying to make it all work.
Right. Right. Well, that's awesome. Well, we're glad you're here with us tonight anyway, basically sharing a little bit of alone time with us and everybody else watching from around the world. We're talking about jazz blues tonight, and I know we're basically going to dig in to one of the lessons that you had on on your course. So let's do a little recap of that. Maybe go over that, do a little review of that. Everybody should have access to that lesson, but let's do a little bit of review there and give us a little bit of the highlights of what we should be looking for in these variations.
Okay. I think this lesson is the second out of 5 from a take 5 that I did. And basically, jazz blues runs along a spectrum, right? You can play really simple blues phrases over the jazz blues changes. You can start to play through some of the more swing-oriented phrases from musicians like Charlie Christian, all the way up to like a full-blown bebop vocabulary with people like Grant Green, Kenny Burrell, Joe Pass. So this one comes from sort of a swing perspective on the changes, and I'm using this position up here to play in the key of F. So one of the things about jazz blues is it's sort of a bridge from like being just like a straight, I don't say just, but from being like more of a Chicago or Texas blues oriented player, where you tend to play in keys like E and A because it comes out, it's so guitaristic. Jazz blues, part of the process is learning to sort of walk in the world of horn players and pianists who tend to play in flat keys like B flat and F. So I put this lesson originally in F, and that meant using a position that looks different from the usual home position down here. You're oriented around the root here. In this position, which I always, in my head, I call it the Charlie Christian position, because when I was starting to figure this stuff out off of records, a big record was Genius of the Electric Guitar, which collected a bunch of the Charlie Christian tunes that he played with Benny Goodman. And he's playing a lot out of this position in various keys. But the original the original solo that we did in the take 5 was built around this shape and had a lot of things where you're playing the flat third to the third, and you're playing the flat 5 to the 5. It gives you these chromatic moves. And then it also has this kind of sound that's edging into the world of bebop, where you go down a mixolydian scale, root, flat 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you try to put in some chromatic notes. The classic thing that some people call the bebop scale is to take mixolydian and add in the major 7. And the reason you do that is because if you're playing sort of in even eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, whoops, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and your next downbeat puts you back on the root. No matter where you start, third gets you to the third, fifth gets you to the fifth. So it's a really useful sound for making these long flowing lines. And so we're based around that sound for when we're on the 1 chord. And then for the 4 chord, it's sort of the original solo kind of hinted at the diminished sound, where you're going from the 4 to the sharp 4 diminished, which is another very characteristic sound of swing as it's sort of edging into bebop. And then the last thing was that there had this, when you get to the turnaround in a jazz blues, if you're in F, you don't necessarily just go from 5 to 4 to 1. A lot of times you go to the 2, G minor 7. You got to tilt your head, 2, to the 5, to the 1. And when I was studying jazz, something I never really got very as far as I would have liked with, but when there was a lot of this very like, you got to learn your 2 5s, and you got to, so I can't even do it now. That's why we're waiting for Tim and Frank to do the 2 5 stuff. But there's this idea of arpeggiating and spelling out the 2 and the 5, and it's really hip. And you should definitely stick around and watch those guys talk about it, because they're gonna kill it for you. But the simpler swing way to do it, and actually something that I heard sort of bluesy bebop guys like Oscar Peterson and Joe Pass do, is to play the 2 either as a scale or as an arpeggio. If it's a scale, it's G Dorian. If it's an arpeggio, it's G minor 7 arpeggio. But I would hear them do that sound starting on, what would be the 2 sound. But instead of then framing the 5 chord, they would just kind of slip into the blues somewhere along the way. And I was like, oh, you can get away with that. That's really cool. And so the original solo for this lesson used that sound. And a lot of times, instead of starting from the roots of the 2, you're playing root, flat 3, 5, and flat 7. You kind of kick it up one interval and you go flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9. And you can kind of ornament it by half stepping below, or doing all kinds of things, connecting scale steps. And the whole trick to it is that when you start to get to the top of the G minor 7 arpeggio or the G minor 9 arpeggio, here's the flat 3rd, 5th, flat 7, and 9 of G minor. Well, this is also simultaneously the 6, the root, and the 3 of the F chord. So that's why it's so slinky, because you never really know it just morphs from the 2 sound into the blues. And I swear, if you take that notion and go back and listen to some recordings of those kinds of musicians, you will hear this all over the place. You'll hear them framing the 2 5 completely as well, but you'll hear both.
Awesome.
So
that's very cool. That's a great explanation and a good way to sort of look at it, and a good setup for, I know you've prepared some variations of this, right? So
yes, I did. And what I did for the variations, I focused on I like to think of it, when I was learning to play, or trying to specifically to play over jazz blues, it just looked like a wasteland. It's like, I got to fill up these 12 bars. And then when I'm done, I got to fill them up again. And I started looking at it in terms of like, where are we going? Like there's 4 bars, like there's bars 1 through 4, bars 5 through 8, bars 9 through 12, I can count. And I like to think about it in terms of like, the first line is, how are you going to get to the 4 chord? You know, we're going somewhere. We're trying to land somewhere. When we're on the 4 chord, we're trying to get back to 1. You know, the 4 is trying to go 4 to sharp 4, back to 1. It's trying to resolve. And then the 2 is trying to get back to the 1 as well. And it's doing it by playing blues, because blues resolves to 1.
Right.
So each of the examples is basically I did variations. I did one example of how to get from 1 to 4, one example of how to go 4 back to 1, and one example of how to do 2 through the blues back to 1.
Awesome. Well, let's take a listen to the first variation, and then let's listen to it, and then you can break it down for us. How's that sound?
Sounds great. One, two, 1, 2, 3.
Awesome, man. Great. That's that. You can definitely hear where that's going, right? So that's the idea. So show us what you're doing there. Kind of step us through how you're thinking about that and what you're actually playing on that.
Okay. Well, this actually also folds in another idea from another musician I really love, which is the vibes player, Milt Jackson. And a lot of other people do it too, but I happened to be listening to him do it recently, and so it got it in my ear. And I talked about this also in my 50 jazz blues licks, because I did some Milt Jackson there too, I think. And here, the idea is there's another little layer of detail, which is you play blues for the first 2 bars. That's kind of your setup. And then your answer now, in this case, like I talked about the 2/5 being like this morph from the 2 sound to the blues sound. Here, we're going to morph from the blues into the sound of playing the changes on the 1. And I'll get into a little more about it, but basically you got your blues set up over the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and now more blues. But now we're into the major sound. And there's that bebop scale taking you down to the B flat. So again, I like to think about having some kind of structure, and so improvising doesn't have to be this completely blank canvas. You can have an idea, like, oh, I'm going to play blues, and then I'm going to kind of get into the sound of the 1 and make it a dominant sounding 1, because that's going to lead me to the 4. So now I got the first 4 bars kind of taped out before I've even played a note, because I got my idea. So blues, and I'm coming from this position here, but to play the reason I did this lick also was because I talked about this lick in the original lesson. But if you want to get the blues sound, you got to slide a little out of position and anchor around the root here with the index finger. Get your root, flat 3, 4, flat 5, and 5. And so that's hidden in this, right? So there's flat 3, 4, flat 5, and 5. You can get it like that, but come on, we're guitar players. This is the way guitar players get that sound. So we got 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you don't have to do the hits, but if you want to kind of hear the sound of the chord behind the blues, it's helpful. And there's your setup, and then we come up with the blues again and walk back down the flat 5, 4, flat 3, and then we're into the major third, and that's what telegraphs, oh, we're playing the changes. And then there's this is definitely like more of a bebop than a swing thing. Some people call it a turn or an embellishment. 16th note, so flat 3, 3, and now you're hammering on 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now we're going down through the major 7 to the flat 7. And here's another very typical bebop thing. jumping up. You get down to the flat 7, you jump up to the 9, and then you keep going on your way down through the 6 and the 5 to the 4, which is now the B flat. So one last thing about this is, so you got this roadmap of like, a couple bars of blues, a couple bars of the changes, gets you to the 4. Even within that, another thing that really matters is your phrasing. And that's something that people talk about all the time. Like they talk about how important phrasing was, but nobody ever explained what it was. And it's kind of just the rhythm and the pacing of your notes as they relate to the bar line. That's how I think about it. So in this case, we're starting before the bar starts. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then landing. It's a micro version of that idea of resolving onto bar 5. Here we're resolving into the downbeat. And then we're resolving into the B flat chord. And that sets us up for this whole call and response. We got a phrase. Are we landing here? Cool. And then a shorter version. We're landing there. That's kind of an answer. And then we sort of pick up the thread again of the original idea. But this time we don't stop. We keep going. And so again, it's like you want to plant these little seeds and have these ways you can draw them out into something bigger. So if you started with a different phrase, you would already convey a bunch of ideas. So you're not just sort of hanging in the breeze. If you've got this, well, it's great. What can we do with that? Oh, we can go there. Can we repeat it? Like there I'm playing more blues. I'm not really getting to the major third. And some way to get out like that. How you bail out, you may need to work it out a little bit. Otherwise you'll end up like me playing the wrong notes in front of people. But you can sit and work it out like, oh, I got to land on that major third. Use your chromatic notes, use your chord tones as landing spots. Know that you got to land somewhere by the time you get to the 4 chord, and it will all work out.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's kind of what you're thinking, right? You're sort of keeping your eye on those chord tones, right? So as when that change comes, you're trying to step into that one of those notes, right?
Yeah, I want to land. When I get to the end of my phrase on the downbeat of bar 5, I want to be on a B flat chord tone. I want to be on the root, the flat 7, the 3rd, or the 5th. That's what I want to get to. So any of those places. So if I'm going. There's the 3rd. It's not the greatest lick in the world, but it gets me to B flat.
Right. Gotcha. And that's basically that. So you're thinking about that first variation is going from the 1 to the 4. And if anybody has any questions about this, we got so many folks watching. If you have questions, post those in the chat. Because we're going to be answering a few of those before we go into this next variation. So let's do a question now, because I think it's important to get some questions in here from everybody watching. So basically someone says, is basically what you're speaking about essentially voice leading? Is that really what you would consider voice leading or not?
Well, I guess I think of voice leading as something that happens when you have chords or like notes that are happening simultaneously. But thinking about voice leading in the sense of like the individual notes that want to resolve, the most fundamental thing that's happening here is that, right? That's the change from the F to the B7, B flat 7. So I am thinking about voice leading in the sense that I'm thinking that if I'm on the 3rd of F, I want that to go to that, and I can express it in a linear way by leaning on the major 3rd when I'm on the F chord, and then going to the flat 3rd of F, because that's going to now sound like the B flat. So in a way, it's voice leading. If you know how the notes from one chord are supposed to resolve onto the next chord, you can take advantage of that. But you're doing it in more of a one note at a time than the kind of simultaneous stacked way that chord voice leading is something that you usually think of.
Cool.
Does that make sense, Jeff?
Absolutely. That's perfect. That makes a lot of sense. So, so our next variation, we're going to just take a look at going from the 4 back to the 1. Is that right?
Yeah.
So let's roll that. So let's roll the performance on that, and then you can break it down and kind of show us what you're doing. Cool?
Sounds good. One, two, three.
There it was.
Okay, I didn't hear that. I hope you guys did.
I did not hear that either, but that's okay because you're going to break it down. So give us the, give us that variation or basically of going from the 4 back to the 1 now, right?
Yes. So we're thinking about playing over now bars 5 and 6 through landing in bar 7 of a 12-bar blues. So that would be basically, however you voice it, B flats, 4 chord, B diminished, which is the sharp 4 diminished, taking you back to 1. And so, for the person who asked about voice leading, you can see that you have several notes in common. This is the one that matters, the root going up a half step. And then this could resolve a few different ways. These 2 notes are going to resolve up like that. And this one is going to go down. But what I'm doing in terms of the lick is really focused on the sound of B flat to B natural, right? So the lick is, so I'm just sort of framing it out with some tritones to kind of spell out the chord. Again, you got to tilt your head. Right? So what I'm doing is I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to spell out a B flat 7 chord. So here's root 3, 5, 6, 5. And then this looks like the flat 7 of the B flat, right? And I'm going to just come down again, sort of just filling in chromatically. I want to get from here to here. So I'm just thinking, if this was B flat, I'd be thinking flat 7, 6, flat 6, 5. So if you're thinking a Mixolydian scale in B flat, here's flat 7, here's 6, here's 5. We can use this chromatic step just to fill in the whole step gap. But then that's happening. So the only real difference between this chord and this chord, between B flat major or B flat 7 or B flat 6, all of which you could be using, to B diminished, a B diminished arpeggio, one way you can think about it is to think of it as a B flat chord, B flat 7, with the root raised a half step. So everything else on this B flat arpeggio is the same, except that the root is now a half step higher. We keep everything else the same. So that's a B diminished sound. If you kick everything up a note and you start from the 3rd of B flat, and then you take the root and you raise it a half step, then you get that, which is why some people think of this as basically a B flat with a flat 9 on top. That's getting into some pretty serious jazz algebra. But the basic idea is we're going to take this B flat chord and then we're going to come down the B diminished arpeggio. And we're just going to kind of dress it up. The bones of this are just, that's all it is. It's just expressing the harmonic idea of 4 to sharp 4 as 2 arpeggios. The B flat 7 going up and the B diminished going down. So what's cool is the phrasing. So, right, it's syncopated. It's coming on the and of 1 and the and of 2, and 2, and 3, and 4, and now we got this chromatic connection, and we go over to this note here, and then we come down the whole arpeggio, and then this note here. Remember, I said these notes want to resolve up a half step, so we land here, and it wants to go up a half step back to the major third, which is just a really fancy way of doing. You know, and that's T-Bone Shuffle and 1,000 other swing tunes, going flat 3. Right, so this is just a fancy version of that. So that's what it is. That gets you from 4 to sharp 4 to 1. And you can play the blues all day without bothering to do this. It's just, but the thing that's nice about it is, even if nobody's playing those colors behind you, even if the rhythm section is just, you can still, and it'll just sound like a couple of mysterious slick notes, and then everything's back to normal.
Nice. That's what we need, is some mysterious notes, right? We need some mystery in here, right?
You want those notes. I mean, because you know, like this is the thing that always bugged me. It's like you're listening, you know, you listen to blues and it's cool, and then you go and you listen to somebody who's got like a little bit of jazz going on. You're like, oh, what are those notes? They got notes I don't have. Yeah. I don't have those in my pentatonic scale. What's going on?
Right. You know? That's awesome. Well, I've got a question about that. Somebody's asking, you know, you're talking about the jazz bebop lick. Is it a jazz bebop scale? How are you looking at that?
What I'm trying to do in this particular lesson is just explain how, even if you're mostly still just playing 1, 4, and 5, you can start to make that transition into a jazzier sound. And so in this case, you know, there's a lot of sort of voodoo around, like, ooh, playing the changes. That's the hard thing that jazz guys do. Well, it is if you're playing over a song with like 12 chords or 15 chords. But if you're playing over blues, the thing that makes Kenny Burrell or Stanley Turrentine or Jimmy Smith or Grant Green or Milt Jackson sound cool on the blues is they're not taking one scale and just like pouring it over the chord progression, right? When they get to a new chord, they're just grabbing a few chord tones and then they're kind of connecting them up with some of that chromatic slinky stuff. So my point is just, you could just play the blues over the B flat. And you'll hear guys like Grant Green and Stanley Turrentine do that all day long. But what they will also do is they will say, I'm on a B flat chord. Well, let me grab some B flat chord tones. There's only 4 of them. So that was a bad resolution, but and so if you break that down and look at it, it's just, you know a B flat 7 chord, right? So I'm just grabbing the 7 and the 5th and the 3rd. Just look at the chords you know and start to sort of like, just mine them for the melodic material they've got hidden inside. If you know this chord, you know how to find the flat 7 and the root, the flat 7 and the 5th and the 3rd. And if you can find the root of B flat, you can find the flat 9 because it's always just a half step above the root. And if you can then recognize when you've got these things that are kind of synonymous, like 5, flat 7, and flat 9 of B flat and root and flat 9 are synonymous with root, flat 3, 4, and flat 5 of the F blues scale. I know it's a lot to hold in your head at once, but with practice, it can be done. And so if you can see that this, now you start to see why the blues scale resolves back to the 1 chord, because it's really kind of referencing the 4 sharp 4 diminished thing. So when you play, if you want just like the bone simple way to do this, when you're on the 4 to the sharp 4 to the 1, play F blues. And then hop off onto the major 3rd and you're done. That's the simple way to do it. F blues. and save that note, save the blue note for bar 6. So bar 5, bar 6, there's your diminished note, there's your major third back to F. Sounds like you're playing the changes, but all you're really doing is playing the blues.
Nice. Very cool. So we've got another question we're going to get to before we go into our next chunk. And that question is this, you know, when you play like this now, are you at the point where you are not having to think about that? So you're just playing when you're playing blues, those things come naturally? Or are you still thinking about that and having to kind of, you know, think about what notes you're playing and what you're going to hit going into the next change?
About 70-30. You know, I can play sort of on autopilot, but I'll start to play a lot of the same things. I'll start to play my licks. And so if I want to really actually reach for something that I don't play all the time, then I got to kind of turn on the brain a little bit and go like, oh, where else can I grab the flat 9? Or where else can I get that diminished thing, or whatever it is? You know, but really, the real light bulb for me was to realize that if you want to play cooler stuff on the blues and you want to get it from those jazzier musicians, you don't have to learn to play jazz on everything just to play jazz stuff on the blues. If you don't want to play Girl from Ipanema, you don't want to play Stella by Starlight, and you don't want to play Giant Steps, you don't have to. You can just go listen to jazz musicians play on the blues form, and you get all their stuff because they're using it all the time on the blues too. Because the blues has diminished chords, the blues has 2/5s, the blues has altered chords, the blues has, you know, dominant chords. So really, like the really, you know, someone who plays jazz from that, you know, that classic period, all those Prestige and Riverside and Blue Note records from the 50s and early 60s, you know, all the people I've been talking about and a million others, they're using all that bebop language, all that soulful, bluesy, swing-oriented stuff to play over the blues form. If you go and you listen to that, and you just, every one of those tracks, every one of those albums, there was a period of about 6 or 7 years when every one of those Blue Note albums had to have a boogaloo, had to have a shuffle, you know, had to have some blues on it. So you just go and cherry pick and get all the blues tunes and don't worry about the stuff you can't hear yet. You know what the blues sounds like. You go and you just listen to that, and it'll start to soak in. You'll start to hear that stuff go by. And so with a little bit of like thinking about it and practicing it, and then going back to the records and like hearing what you can hear and hearing what you can't, you start to notice when they're playing blues phrases, and you know that everything that isn't a blues phrase, that's the stuff you got to go grab and go, well, what are they doing?
Nice. That's a great answer. That's a great tip for guys that are trying to get into this, that maybe are blues players, but they want to add a little bit of jazz to their blues, but they, you know, the daunting task of studying jazz for years just to do that is too much, you know.
Just treat it like B.B. King, you know, like don't worry about playing it in every key. You know, learn to play jazz blues in B flat and F. That's like learning to play Stevie Ray Vaughan in E and A. It's the same thing. Just learn those licks in the keys you're going to use, and just go home happy.
Awesome. All right, so you've got one more variation for us tonight, and I know we've got a few more questions. We'll get to those after this variation. We might do a lightning round of questions, but let's talk about this variation coming up. What are you going to do for us? What are we going to hear when we roll this next track?
Okay, this is that thing I mentioned back at the beginning of kind of, I think of it as the 2 to no 5, or 2 to the blues. You know, the 2 chord in the key of F is G minor 7, and the swing sound is going from 2 to 5 to 1 instead of 5 to 4 to 1. So instead of, you have either or. And, you know, you can think of this really simply. If you listen to any T-Bone Walker, you know, it's the part where they get to this. That's 2/5. That's 2/5. So it's not that exotic. It's straight out of T-Bone Walker. It doesn't get any bluesier than that. So this is a way of playing a lick over the 2, and then kind of slowly just kind of blurring the line between the 2 sound and the sound of the blues of the 1 chord. So it's a G minor 7 sound that just kind of morphs into F blues.
All right, very cool. Let's listen to that.
One, two, 1, 2, 3.
Very cool. So once again, you can hear that, and I think that's the coolest thing about this stuff that you're showing is it's just playing there by yourself doing the lines. You can hear the chords, you can hear what's going, and that's really kind of where that's coming from. So break this down a little bit, show us kind of what you're doing on this.
Okay. So there's a couple steps to this thought process. The first step is, what's the 2 chord? It's G minor 7. How do I get that in the same position I'm already in, so I'm not jumping around? And so, because again, I want to make it feel like I'm playing. This is what people do. This is what the Grant Greens and Kenny Burrells of the world do. But it's also, I'm trying to make this as much like playing blues as possible, where I can kind of just hang in a position and just get what I want without a lot of jumping around, because that helps it just feel more intuitive. So how can I get G minor 7 in this position? I want to get the chord tones. So here's G, here's the flat 3rd, the 5th, the flat 7, and I'm going to go all the way up to the 9. It's sitting right there and I can get it. And so now what would connect those together are the scale steps. And in this case, we'd use the scale steps from G Dorian, because Dorian is the mode that is derived from working off of the 2nd degree of a major scale. So in this case, take the notes of F major. I know we're playing more F blues and F mixolydian, but just stay with me for a minute here. If we think of G now being the 2nd step of a G major scale of an F, this is why I hate talking about modes. It gets so confusing when you do it this way. Let's just stick to the notion that we've got. All right, I've got down this path. I'll keep going. So here's F major. Here's G Dorian, just the notes of F from G to G. But now that I've told you that, forget it and just think, here's G Dorian. It's going to fill in the scale steps in between these chord tones. We can think of this as root 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, root 2. Then we can start from the flat 3rd, and it makes a hipper arpeggio to leave out the root and just think flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9. And then we can start to do stuff with it. So all I did there, here's my 5th of G minor, going chromatically down to the flat 4, around to the 2nd, and to the flat 3rd. And this is just an example of bebop is kind of the language of indirection. It's like that person who, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but it's like that person who uses 5 words to say something when they could have used 1, you ask, like, are we going for ice cream? Well, it seems to me that a trip to the confectionery is in order. That's kind of bebop, instead of just saying, yeah, ice cream. So instead of just saying that, we say this. Right? It's a much more complicated way of saying the exact same thing, which is take me from the 5 to the flat 3. Now we're going to wander around. So the idea is we're going to take our starting note, and then, these 2 notes are going around that note, right? Here's the 4 and the 2. That's getting us to the 3. But just to get to the 4, we're not even going straight to the 4. We're going to go there chromatically, and then we're going to go around, and then we're finally going to land here, right? So that's all a lot of what bebop is like focusing on the chords, but just taking a very scenic route to get to the chord tones. So so the rest of this is walking up. Now again, we want to go from the flat 3 to the 5 to the flat 7, but that's a little too direct. So we go up through a scale step, connecting up flat 3 to 5. Scale step. And now it looks like we're going to go here, but we don't. We bail out. And that's all blues. Right, flat 3, 2, root, 6, 5, root, slide in the major 3rd. So again, it's flat 3, but then when we come back around, it's major 3, which really tells you you're home. So the blues sound is taking you back to the beginning again, back around to the 1 chord. And so there's that moment up Up until now, this all sounds like the 2 chord. Right, we're all based on that sound. Right? Except, and it looks like we're going to here, but this whole time, once we hear this, then kind of retroactive, it's like, wait a second. When you said that, did you mean 4, 5, flat 7? Or did you mean 5, 6, root, flat 3? What did you mean on those 3 notes? Well, both, right? Because it overlaps, it dovetails, whatever you want to call it. And that's how we get back without ever actually playing the 5, but it still sounds like we're playing the changes. Just cool.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds great, man. It sounds awesome. All right, so let's do a couple more questions. Earlier, there's a question. Earlier, you mentioned going from the 4 to the sharp 4 to the 1, and you played a chord over the sharp 4 that this student did not recognize. Can you explain that concept just a bit more of what you were doing there?
Yeah, I think it was this. I hope it was that, because that's what I'm going to explain. I'm playing a B flat 7 chord here. I've got the root, the flat 7, the 3rd, and the 5th. And there's a few different ways to finger this, but you can think of it as a very stripped down version of this bar chord. If you took this, let's start from the very beginning. Let's take a B flat major bar chord. Power chord. Well, not a power chord. It's got the 3rd. The whole thing, right? And now let's take out the 5th. Let's not worry about playing the 5th because we're going to have the 5th up here, so we don't need to double it. All right, so we're going to lose that note. Now, if I had my thumb in here, we'd have this. And now let's lose this root because we already got a root. We got a root down here and down here. So now we've just got this. Right? So we got a root, 3 and 5. That's a triad. That's enough to call it a chord, and then double the root down here, so it sounds bigger and we got more bass. Great. Well, now we want a 7th chord. So let's put in the flat 7. That's here. And that's okay because we already have 2 roots, so we can lose one of the roots. So here's root, flat 7, 3, and 5. Well, now we don't want to bar it because we're going to hear all this other stuff we don't want. So now we're going to finger it like this. And then the underside of the index finger is going to mute the 5th string. And then somehow or other, like this part of your finger or this part of your ring finger, something's going to keep the high string from ringing. And that's kind of a basic jazz voicing. A lot of times people will even lose the 2nd string and just play the 6th string, the 4th string, and the 3rd string because it has everything to tell you what the chord is. It's got a major 3rd, so it's a major sounding chord. It's got a flat 7. Now we know it's a dominant 7th chord. And it's got a root, so now we know whose dominant it is. It's B flat. Maybe I should have done that in the opposite direction, but it tells you what you need to know. And this is something that a lot of musicians call a Freddie Green voicing. Some people call it a shell voicing. But it's the kind of voicing that you can keep really dry when you're playing rhythm guitar. But you can also get a lot of power out of it if you're just playing a big unamplified archtop guitar like Freddie Green did. You want to just like relax your neck every time you play it and get that kind of sound. So now when you have that, getting to the chord. Now we've got the flat 7 and the 3rd. Now to make it into a B diminished chord, a sharp 4 chord, we want to just raise this note a half step and keep these 2 notes. But that looks stupid, so we're going to flip these fingers and use the middle finger for what's now the root of the B diminished chord, and then keep these 2 notes from what was the B flat 7 chord. Now these notes have new names. Relative to B, this is a diminished 7th and a minor 3rd. That's, again, that's some jazz algebra we don't need to really worry about right now. But that's the voicing I played. If you want to get that note on top still, which would be the diminished 5th of B, then you can make a little bar and play the 4th string and the 2nd string with the bar and put your ring finger in on the 3rd string and get your middle finger down in the bass so you can get. And then I'm going to this chord, which I think of as the Duke Robillard chord, because that's who showed it to me, but I know it's another Freddie Green chord, because he explained that as well. And here I've got the 5th and the 3rd and the root of F. So it's a nice one because for swing, sometimes you don't want to put a seventh on the downbeat on the first chord. So then you've got. That's another lesson.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, let's do one more question. Let's do one more what would you play kind of question here. What would you play over a G flat 7 flat 5 chord on the way back to F?
What is this, homework? G flat 7 flat 5. I gotta figure out what that is. That? I play blues. Because blues resolve. This chord is not, I'll try to take it seriously, but seriously, that is one thing I would do. I mean, this chord, okay, these are some weeds I've gotten into so many times with students. Whenever I mention tritone substitutions, it like takes us an hour to dig our way back out again. So I'll try to give a short answer. But this chord is just a substitute for this chord. Looks a lot more benign when you think of it that way. This is a tritone substitution for C7. C7 is just the 5 of F. So whatever is going to work over the 5 is going to work over this hairy monster here. And so if playing 2 to the blues to 1 works over this to this G minor. If I can play G minor 7 stuff over the blues over C7 and land on F, then because this is just a substitute for C7, then I can play G minor 7, play the blues of F, and then resolve on F. And it'll still be the same thing. If you want to know how to actually arpeggiate and spell out and play licks over this chord, then you need to talk to Frank Vignola.
Nice. Awesome. Someone in the chat said, great answer. I get it. They're light bulbs. So very cool, man. All right. Well, dude, we could talk about this stuff all night, but I know we got a bunch of other artists to get to, and you got to go back to being alone, sitting there in Austin and hanging out. So I don't want to keep you from that. But man, thanks so much for being here. This was awesome. Always a pleasure to listen to you play and teach as well, So thank you for doing this, and we'll hopefully get things back to normal and be able to bring you back down into the studio at TrueFire. That would be awesome.
Yeah, man, that would be great. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what Tim and Frank have got to say. And I'm sure
awesome.
Else is too.
Very cool. Well, thank you, David. Thanks so much for being here.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. See you later.
Absolutely. That's David Hamburger, everyone. For sure, check out, he's got so many great courses at TrueFire. Go to the link below in the chat, below the chat, and go to his page, his educator page. You'll see all the cool stuff he has available at TrueFire. Some really cool jazz blues stuff where he breaks it down just like he's doing here. And if you dig what he's doing here, remember, you can get this as a course. We're going to tab out all of those variations, and he really breaks it down in a really easy to understand way, going from the 1 to the 4, from the 4 back to the 1. Those simple transitions. We'll have that all tabbed out. So go to the pre-order, and you can order this course right now for 50% off. So do that. We will get it all tabbed out, and then you'll get this course. Not just David's part, but Tim's part and Frank's part, because it's going to be a pretty cool evening of jazz blues here at TrueFire. And if you dig these camps, let us know, shout out, and let us know you're enjoying these things we put together. We have to think a little bit differently during this time of, a little bit different things happening in the world. And we really appreciate all of our TrueFire educators for jumping in and doing these camps. We did the blues soloing, the blues rhythm. We've got a couple camps coming up this next month as well. We're doing a swing rhythm camp and a rock soloing camp. So look for those. Stay tuned to that. Remember, you always have to RSVP. That way you get the link to all the advanced materials so you can study up. And then you'll have a lot of cool questions to ask once you're here, right? So hopefully all of my campers out there are doing good. Throw another log on the campfire because we're just getting going here. Up next, we have an amazing musician, the guy that's just has done a couple courses at TrueFire, and we love the stuff he teaches. Is not only super knowledgeable, but just has a great way of relating all this material, this crazy complex material, in a very relatable and understandable way. And so us mere mortals can sort of get a grasp on what he's doing. And we appreciate that because otherwise we would just sit here confused. So that really helps. But for sure, check out Tim's courses as well. There's a link to his educator page, his courses at TrueFire, and he has an amazing TrueFire channel where he posts tons of great content in there. So check out his channel as well. So I'm not going to talk anymore about Tim either. I'm just going to welcome him to the camp. So, hey, Tim, how are you tonight, man?
I'm doing good. Good to see you, Jeff.
Good to see you too. Glad you're here.
The green room was very comfortable.
Very good. We make sure we, everybody that comes in, we'll always put the artists in the waiting room, in the green room. We make sure they have their favorite beverage and plenty of snacks there. And so hopefully our staff took really good care of you while you were in there.
Absolutely wonderful.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, so, we're on the jazz blues kick, and your latest course is about jazz blues. For sure, you play a lot of different stuff. You're obviously a great jazz player and a great blues player, and you have this way of, interlinking all of that together. So tonight we're going to be looking at several variations on one of your lessons. So let's start by talking about that lesson, the original lesson. Give us a little rundown on that and what it is and what you're thinking about there.
Okay. So the course in general was about what do you play when you have a blues that has more than 3 chords in it, So basically the idea is to not panic when you see extra chords in the progression. This one is relatively simple. There are a few extra chords. It's called Tacoma Blues, and it is based on a great Wes Montgomery song called West Coast Blues. So a couple of things about it that are, unique is that it's in 6/8 feel. So maybe the feel is like... that kind of thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And then also there's, right away you'll notice it goes to flat 7 dominant, which in the key of B flat would be A flat 7. So A flat 7 is a whole step below B flat. So we call that flat 7 dominant. And then on the way to the 4 chord, which happens in the normal place, we're going to do B minor to E7. That is also probably the most profoundly unique thing about this. You can't just kind of forget about it. You have to address it. So we're going to play lines that are based on B minor to E7. Some people would say it's a 2/5. It looks an awful lot like a 2/5, and you can treat it like a 2/5. So then we'll just see a couple of different variations.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great explanation of it all. So tell us about the first variation. What do what's your thinking on the first variation here?
So one thing you might notice is the track has no extra guitar on it. So it's just bass and drums, although the track in the chorus has guitar in it. But I felt like in order to make this a step up, maybe we could leave the accompaniment guitar out. So the first 2 choruses, and they go by kind of quick, so it's not going to take very long to get through 2 choruses. I'm going to play. I always say it's kind of like B.B. King went to college. It's basic blues licks that are crafted in order to be able to make the changes when you need to. A little bit of bending, a little bit of vibrato, that kind of thing, and then also a few little very minimal chord stabs to sort of announce the harmony a little bit for the listener's ear. So I do 2 choruses of that where I'm basically playing kind of standard blues vocabulary when it's applicable, and then making the changes when I need to.
Awesome. Very cool. Let's listen to that. Let's check it out. Nice. That's awesome, man. Very smooth. Very smooth. All right. So break some of that down for us. Give us the rundown of what you're doing.
Of course, we're not going to be able to get into the nitty gritty about the licks or the notes that I played. I want to talk about conceptually what I was thinking. So if we break it down to the simplest thing, what we really want to do here, that kind of lick is typical, right? But the chords are moving in funny places. So what you might try to do is play a simple line over a B flat 7th chord. When the chord changes, move your hand down 2 frets and play a similar line. And then back up. And then here comes the weird one, B minor 7 to E7. We have no choice but to really play something that fits those chords. So I'm going to suggest playing a B minor arpeggio. And if you like, you can play B minor pentatonic. And then make sure you move your hand back down for the E flat. So let me put that together just in one phrase. Here's the B flat, A flat, B flat, B minor, E7, E flat. Regular old blues there. Back to the 1. Then what I was doing over the 4 and the 5 is I was doing kind of a Wes Montgomery thing. There's a notion that I want to convey through this is the notion of the companion minor. So it's easy to understand this if you know a little bit about where things are on the guitar. If you have an F9 or an F7 chord, the companion minor is the minor 7th chord, which is built from the 5th of that chord. So the 5th of F is C. And so we're going to couple C minor 7 with F7, even though the accompaniment isn't doing that. So we're going to play over F, we're going to play C minor to F. And then over E flat, we're going to play a B flat minor to E flat. And this is something that in a slightly more sophisticated realm, you wouldn't want to maybe do this on a Muddy Waters tune, but in a jazz blues realm, you can always couple the dominant 7th chords with their companion minor. And that's what I'm doing there. I did something like, and then this guy doesn't have the ubiquitous 5 at the end. It just stays on the 1 until the end of the phrase, and then it starts back over again right at the 1. Okay, so that's kind of what I was thinking about, and I would like to recommend that folks do this. Really, just try and get through it with the simplest sounds for a while until you get a sense of when it's moving to funny places, and then of course, you got to learn your arpeggio. So you go to one of those TrueFire courses that teaches you arpeggios and you get that stuff down, and we're really addressing the chords more than your average blues rock kind of situation, but not to an extent that it sounds, hopefully, that it doesn't sound academic. We want it to still be greasy. So we do these kinds of things. That kind of business as much as we can. Okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. We like that kind of business. That business is right up our alley, man. That's awesome. All right,
Yeah.
so that's a great explanation of that, and definitely those are some good tips there. We've got some questions coming in, and if anyone wants to ask Tim questions, kind of relevant to what we're working on here, fire away. We have one question that's slightly irrelevant, but the question is, what kind of pickup is that in your guitar?
Do that again.
What kind of pickup is that in your guitar?
This is the famous Charlie Christian Telly. This is made by Lawler Pickups, and I'm a early adopter, maybe one of the very earliest adopters of this pickup. And it's based on, similar to but not identical to, the old Gibson Charlie Christian pickup. And they call it the Charlie Christian for Telecaster because it's sized down slightly, and although you do have to cut a hole in the guitar to make it work, and it's got modern magnets, but it's got the old 38 gauge wire, which makes a big difference. Really a wonderful pickup, and that's part of my sound.
That's very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, we'll get back to some, some questions about playing here, but we had to get that one out of the way.
Yeah.
So let's look at your second variation, right? The second variation, you're talking about double stops. Is that right?
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that, how you're thinking on that.
So my idea was that I would do 2 choruses of single note stuff with a few chord punctuations. I didn't really talk much about the chord punctuations during that, but you'll see there's only a few in there. So in the second one, I wanted to play as much double stop material as I could. And so in the first chorus, I played thirds mostly. And then in the second chorus, I played sixths. Now, the relationship between thirds and sixths is very interesting because if you invert a third, you get a sixth. And a major third turns into a minor sixth. And a minor third turns into a major sixth when you invert them. And so it's a very interesting relationship between those two sounds. Thirds are a little, oh, sorry. You've heard them, it may sound like Italian music or Hawaiian music or whatever. And then the sixths are something you hear a lot in soul music and country music. But you very rarely hear them played on guitar anyway as lines. And so that's something I'm attempting to do in this.
Awesome. Well, let's roll this track. Yeah, nice. Very cool. Tell us about that. Do a little deeper dive into what you're playing there.
About this. Now, one thing you could do if you want to understand the basis of this, I would say learn how to play a major scale harmonized in thirds up and down the guitar. There's material out there. You don't have to invent this. You just basically play a major scale simultaneously on a pair of strings that live right next to each other. And then move both notes together up the key, third away from each other. And that's the first thing to do. The next thing to do is make it into a dominant seventh sound. So you can do one of two things. You can flat the seventh in that major scale, or you can look at that major scale from the perspective of the fifth degree. Either way will work. Some people would call it a Mixolydian mode harmonized in thirds. If you like that kind of talk, then you can use that kind of thinking. What I did was, and by the way, technique-wise, in the previous example, I was mostly using what we typically call hybrid picking. This time I'm going to use a lot of picking where I'm playing the thirds with the second and third finger while I use the pick as a sort of auxiliary. So for instance, this is a B-flat seventh sound. right? So if I play a B flat 7th chord, and then I play this set of thirds, that's the sound of a B flat 7th chord, B flat 7th scale played in thirds. And you can slide into them. That's another fun thing you can do. And then I just took it down a whole step for the A flat 7. Then I come back to the home bass place. Now that's something that blues guys know pretty well. You play the root, then the 3rd and the 5th with the slide, then the 4th and the 6th, 5th and flat 7, right? And then here's a cool one. This is the sort of the probably the special one that lives inside of this chorus. Play this. Now that's something I must have stole it from Barney Kessel, maybe. I know maybe Ron Eshtay, my old friend and teacher, might have shown it to me. Basically, we're playing an arpeggio of B minor 7, B minor 9, and we're approaching the notes from below in a couple of cases. I didn't play all of that, but, and I'm plucking it with these two fingers. Okay, so I go back to the B flat. Then here's the B minor, and then up a half step, I'm in E flat now. Right, or down here. Right, right, that kind of sound. They're not all thirds, but it's mostly thirds. And then I didn't play thirds over the 5 and the 4 chords. I just played, you know, more of that arpeggio stuff. But you certainly could play something. So, and the nice thing about these thirds is there's only 2 shapes, and they lay out really nice on the guitar, and they look like little parts of the chord, because guess what? The chord is built in thirds as well. Okay, and when we get to the 6th, which we'll talk about now, it's even more closely related to the picture of the chord. So when I go to 6th, the shapes are not right next to each other on adjacent strings, so I use a pick and my 3rd finger. And occasionally I will finish the line with a single note just to make it sound complete. So I'm doing basically what looks like the 2 fingers that you would hold when you hold a B flat 7th chord. Sliding in, so this is a diminished triad here, but it's just the outside 2 notes of that, right? Then 1st finger plays those 2, the D and G, the D and the B string. There's the 1 and the 6. There's the 3 and the 1. Now I forgot about the flat 7 and the 9. Then I just take it down 2 frets for my A flat chord. Then back up to 1. And then my little funny B minor chord. That's just basically B flat or B minor pentatonic with a 6th in it, to, you know, all played with this same shape. Go down a half step and do all that same stuff again for the 4 chord, and then back to 1. That kind of stuff is also possible, like you might learn from Red Volkart or something. All right, and then on the 4 and the 5. Same idea on B flat, on E flat, sorry, and then back to 1. Now, a little bit less improvisational than I might maybe be some other time because you got to work some of this stuff out. But you'll notice that all these little things, when you see it written out, you'll see it really lines up with the chord shape that you're used to. And it's quite like a halfway between playing chords and playing melodies, you know. And so it's easier to actually to keep track of where you are.
Awesome. Very cool. Great explanation. All right. Well, let's do a couple questions. We've got some questions coming in from some folks. So let's do a couple questions. If anyone has any questions for for Tim here, post them in the chat there, and we'll get to as many as we can. So the first question is, when you're playing more than one chorus, are you thinking about trying to develop the theme from chorus to chorus, or are you looking for completely new ideas to throw in that next chorus?
Well, we broke this up into 3 segments, but it was really just one performance all the way through. So I was in this particular case, and usually, mostly, hopefully, there is an arc of the solo you're developing. Now, I'm a big fan of repetition and theme building, so I like to even think of one idea is a chorus, and then the next chorus is a new idea, but it's reflective of the earlier idea, and then there's a building and a building, and then very often you can reflect, say in chorus number 3, you kind of tease about chorus number 1, and so it is definitely the former idea of there's an arc here, and then we want it to peak, and then we want it, to culminate into something that's quite exciting or fits the mood we're looking for. Maybe not excitement, but something like that. Yes. So I'm not inclined to spin every idea I know. One of the things I noticed when I was a young guy coming up is that if you spew all of your stuff in the first, couple of choruses, the rest of the night becomes very, very long, right? No, people aren't really interested in a guy saying the same thing over and over. We know that about conversations, and it's okay. If you've got a really good thing to say, you can say it many times in many different ways. But yeah, definitely want to build an arc and maturity comes into play. We have to take our time. We can't be in a hurry. We can't be nervous about saying what we need to say, because we know we're going to have however many choruses, and we try and make it build like that.
Good. All right. Perfect. So let's a question that a student had about something that you mentioned earlier, and the question is: so is the companion minor always a fifth up?
Yes. So one thing you can do to test this out is you can say, well, what's the companion minor of A7? E minor 7. What's the companion minor of C7? G minor 7. And another way to look at it is if you know how to play a 2 and a 5, like a 2-5-1, the companion minor will look like a 2 to the dominant 7th's 5. That's the only problem with that is that the dominant 7th doesn't have to be a 5. It could be the 1 chord, and you're going to put a companion together with it.
Got it.
And what happens when you do that, let's say we're going to use B flat because we're in the key of B flat. The companion of B flat is exactly F minor 7. See how I waited for everybody to shout it out? So
I heard them all shout.
Yeah, everybody. The notes of F minor 7 happen to be the 5th of B flat, the flat 7th of B flat, the 9 of B flat, and the 11th of B flat. So in some ways, by playing F minor 7 in front of B flat, we get a kind of B9 sus, and then a release. And that's really what we're doing. We're creating this very soft tension and release inside of the sound of one chord.
Got it.
And you can do it harmonically and you can do it melodically. If you do it melodically, that's the soloist's prerogative. If you do it harmonically, you might want to make sure that the other guys that you're playing with are cool with it, because it's definitely not your just regular dominant 7th sound.
Right. Very cool. Very cool. All right, let's do one more question. Let's do a question here that says, how can you approach improvising over tricky chord changes without just outlining the arpeggios of the chord? What would you suggest someone try to build those chops with?
Right. Very good. Now, if it's a blues based idea, it's really a really good idea not to stray too far away from the blues. Even if you're becoming quite sophisticated, you always want to return to a little greasy part, right? So very often, what makes a blues, regardless of whether there's fancy chords in it or not, is that there's a one dominant type chord. If it's a dominant seventh type blues, there's a one dominant in the first bar. Then anything can happen in bar 2, 3, and 4. There's a 4 chord in bar 5. Almost always. The fanciest blues all over the map can still be a blues because it's a 4 chord in bar 5. Then anything can happen after that. Usually in a fancier blues, you're just winding your way back from 4 to 1. And then you do usually some kind of turnaround, which may have some degree of fanciness or not, right? So the trick is that when you get to the one, when you're on those bar 1 or bar 4 or bar 11 and 12, you play bluesy so that you can remind yourself and your listener that it's a blues, right? So you can go back to whatever kind of regular, B.B. King vocabulary or minor pentatonic blues vocabulary that you like. Then the other thing is, if you're going to play an arpeggio, you have to grease it up a little bit, right? So don't be afraid. If you're playing B flat 7, so if I play this, not very bluesy, right? So the notes of the chord don't evoke that bluesy quality, because the bluesy quality is an idiom in blues that is based in things like the flat third moving to the third, right? Vibrato, slurs and slides, the flat 6 moving to the 5th. Attitude, greasiness. The arpeggio is just a sound, but you got to do something to it to make it sound groovy, right? So if you could say, now I took 6 and bent it up to flat 7 instead of just playing straight. I went, so we need to learn. This is really a question that comes up frequently. How do we make these arpeggios sound like music instead of like exercises? Well, the same way you make a major scale sound like music, the same way you make a written piece of music sound like music, you got to put some music into it. You got to put some of your own juice into it. You have to interpret it. So that's what we do with arpeggios.
Very cool. All right, great answer. A little greasiness is always good there.
Oh man, and if you can ever just play a big blues lick, do it.
When in doubt.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. All right, so let's look at your. We've got one more variation that you put together for us here, and I think you're talking about triads and seventh chords. Tell us a little bit about what we're gonna hear in this next variation.
Well, since we started out with 1, then we went to 2, then now we're going to go to 3 and even 4. This includes harmonizing the scale of the chord of the moment, so B flat mixolydian or E flat mixolydian or anything like that, into these triad scales. And on my channel, there's a whole bunch of stuff about triad scales that everybody can check out if they like. The notion is that you're going to play melodies that are based on the bluesy sound of a mixolydian. Oh, I played that in A, sorry. Now, the interesting thing is the 6th that I was playing before, oftentimes the 6th is the outside 2 notes of a first inversion or second inversion triad. So what we're doing here is I switch over to regular finger picking, and I'm playing 3 notes instead of 2, but from a distance it might look kind of like the same shapes. And then the 4-part chords are inversions of dominant 7th chords, dominant 9th chords, dominant 13th chords, some diminished sounds, and then this kind of thing, that sort of what I call a chord stream, where I play a stream of chord voicings that are all the same chord with a little melodic interpolation as well. So we can watch it now.
Let's watch. Yeah. Yeah, nice. Awesome. All right, man. So you got to break that down for us. Show us what you're doing there and tell us about
Okay.
it.
So again, this is for me. A lot of this stuff is inspired by West Montgomery, although I'm not playing, West Montgomery licks necessarily, but it's the feeling. The melodies can get quite simple. Ba da dee da, be dee ba ba doo da. Think of like a Count Basie horn section or something. So I'm thinking right off the bat, I went from a B flat 9 chord, like we all know, that one. Right? What did I say? So here's what I'm doing there. That's a B flat 9 chord, maybe the top 4 notes only. Then a B flat 13th chord. And then an A flat triad, which ends up being an A flat triad against B flat gives you a dominant 7th kind of upper partial type sound. That note is the 9, that note is the 4, and that note is the flat 7. That's an A flat major triad against B flat. Right. So I say, and then I'm playing this part, these 3 notes of this B flat 9 chord, like the Stormy Monday chord that we all know, also known as D minor 7 flat 5. And then I can do a similar thing on the A flat, because that was pretty much the 1 bar of B flat that I get. So I say, something along those lines, and then back, and then what did I do here? I'm going to spend just a second with that. This right here is a B minor 7th chord. I take away one of the notes and it makes it a B minor 11th chord, and I play the melody up above. Then the B9, did I say B flat? I meant B minor 7 or B minor 11. Then B minor 9. And then I reach up here and get the 9 again. You can tell I like 9s. And then I hit an E flat 7. Now, the next thing I did is interesting. I superimposed the diminished scale all in chords, or diminished melody in chords, over the 4 chord. Even though it's not in the backing, I went. Definitely got that from Wes. This is just playing this diminished chord shape on the middle set. It's a diminished scale all in chords. It's perfectly wonderful. And then back to the 1. I don't know I can't remember what I did there. Some kind of interesting thing, I hope. And then this 4 to 5. That's just the bits of this regular cowboy F7 chord. That sound. I'm might sneak back into the 6th if I really need to, because sometimes it to keep your fingers from getting too tangled up. Then back to 1. Then the next one, I did something kind of interesting, and I need to spend a minute talking about it. I went, now, somewhere along the line, I think maybe Howard Roberts showed me this. I've seen it in a couple of, way back, this is way back, you know, in the early days. But it's a B flat 13th chord, spelled flat 7, 3, 13, 1. And I just play it on a blues scale. The top note is a blues scale. And it works in a parallel way. Isn't that cool? And you can do it here. Because this chord here is the same. It looks different, but it's the same as that. Right? And then you can play from the flat 7 and the natural 7. And then you can do, so I'll do it from the beginning of the chorus. I went 3, 4, 5, 6. And then some kind of thing like that. Right, that same move that I did on B flat, I did on A, and then I did it again. And then another one of those little chord streams. Maybe I don't remember exactly what I did there on the 4 chord. And then back to 1. Then the 4 and the 5. So inversions, basically. You got to get to do this. You got to get your inversions. But I will say that all the melodies are just really the simplest blues melodies you can have. Like, that kind of thing. And then there's one more thing I got to say at the very end. I played this thing that I learned from Lenny Bro, where I took the backing track is vamping from B flat to A flat for the last little bit. So I took this little 2-note chord, which is B flat to A flat. So it's just the flat 7 and the 3rd of each of these chords. And then I went. Oh, sorry. It's an old trick that you got to kind of spread your hand out so you're plucking the chords with this and you're playing the melodies with the 3rd finger. And that's just a vamp out, kind of a fun thing I love to do.
That's great, man. It sounds great, man. So I've got one more question.
Oh, sorry.
But you know, there's so many people watching right now, and there's so many people that can't even get questions out because they're just basically saying awesome things. I'm just going to read through the list. Wow, perfectly wonderful. This is so good. Gold, man. Tim is brutal. Great stuff. So, man, they're totally digging this.
Oh, thank you very much, everybody, for sticking around and listening. I know that sometimes you might say, "What the?" and it's going like this, and then one little thing will kind of poke into your brain. You know, one little thing can open up a whole world. So I'm glad.
Absolutely. Well, you're giving us lots of that. You're giving us gold. So, one question here is this: how would you articulate Wes octaves when you solo? So over a blues or something, it's more than just note choices in the octaves, but it's all the little inflections. So any tips on that?
I didn't talk about octaves on this, because that could have been a part of the double stop thing too. But let's take a lick. I have a thing I'm working on. It's called multi-stop blues. And the idea of it is you take a simple blues lick that everybody knows, and you harmonize it in double stops, triple stops, and 4 parts. I've been working on it for a while. It'll come out someday. Maybe it'll be a TrueFire course.
Yes.
So we'll take that lick, right? And we'll play it in octaves. Now, in order to get the octaves to work right, you have to get a big fat thumb on them if you want them to sound like Wes. And there's a lot of deadening going on or muting going on. So these fingers here, they aren't just laying there. They're actually killing those bottom strings. The middle string that's in between the two fretted notes is dead by the first finger. And then the top string is also dead by the first finger. So if I got, I'm going to say, sorry, let's get it clean, Tim. And again, the West thing is to slide. I remember my high school teacher, when I was first trying to do this, he wasn't much of a guitar player, but he had a good ear. And he said, you got to make it more slippery. If you want to sound like Wes, you got to make it more slippery. So one thing you can do is take a B flat 7 scale, and just play it in octaves to see if you can articulate the sound to get the notes to be, together, they stay together. I also visualize my little finger of the two. I don't follow my first finger with my eye. I tend to follow my little finger all the way, and I use my little finger for the top note all the time. Wes didn't. Wes would play like that, where he switched to his third finger for the bottom sets. But I just use. Now I've been told you can't sound like Wes if you do it that way. Well, of course that's all right. That's all right. Wes, no one's ever going to sound like Wes, so we just do it our best, But so you take a little lick. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's 8 o'clock here in Tacoma, so I can play a few mistakes. Anyway, so that's my idea about octaves. I bet you there's a TrueFire course where somebody actually talks in some great depth about octaves and Wes Montgomery. So, on TrueFire, you can do that search, right? I bet if you typed in Wes Montgomery octaves, you'd get about 100 lessons about it that you can check.
Absolutely. Well, that was what you played there was awesome, man. It was spectacular. So, and I think we would have questions and people asking for more information all night, but then it will end up being 11 o'clock there, and who knows what could happen. So, and
Frank would probably fall asleep on his couch. So
Frank might have to snag a nap before he comes on.
Frank gets in here.
Awesome, man. Well, so thank you so much for doing this, Tim. Once again, everybody watching, follow the link to Tim's stuff and check it out. But thank you for being here and sharing all of your knowledge. The one other question was somebody wanted to make sure we got you to guarantee on camera that you'll do at least 5 more TrueFire courses.
All right, I will. And you know what? I've got about 3 or 4 of them already kind of concocted in my brain. And my channel is also very helpful because I'm hearing from people, that help me because I have this basic assumption about what it takes to do this and that and this. But then someone comes and says, hey, it would be really helpful if you talked about this. Could you do something about this? Well, nice. Sometimes that turns into an idea for a course. So I'll do as many as you let me do, man.
Well, I
got nothing better to do.
Well, we have no plans of stopping, so we'll keep this rolling. But thanks for being here tonight.
One more little shout out. Pearl Django is the band that I play in. It's a gypsy swing type group, and I play an archtop guitar and maybe not too much blues, but a little bit of blues. And we're dormant right now, but our CDs are all out there. So if you're interested in a little different shade of what I do, then check out Pearl Django.
Awesome. Definitely check that out. Thank you, Tim. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Take care, man.
All right. See you, buddy. All right, everyone. That is Tim, the amazing Tim Lerch. I mean, just, it's a encyclopedia of everything guitar playing. But as I said, he has such a great way of breaking it down to where it's easy to understand, and we can, all basically benefit from that. So thanks, Tim, for sure. Check out all of his courses at TrueFire. He's got a couple of great courses, and as he mentioned, his TrueFire channel, where you can get in and ask him questions, and you can suggest things for him to put in his next course. So definitely do that. So thank you guys if you're still here with us, and it looks like all of you are. This is awesome. Everybody is hanging in here. We've got a great audience here into the late night of our Jazz Blues Camp. I am Jeff Sheets. I'm the Director of Education here at TrueFire. Love to hear from you guys all and hear what you would like us to do camps on. Once again, don't forget, this entire camp, all of this amazing musical goodness is going to be put together into a course, into a TrueFire course. We're tabbing out these examples that all of our educators are doing. So you'll get David Hamburger, Tim Lerch, and Frank Vignola, all of their stuff. You'll be able to download that. So pre-order it now. If you jump on there now, it's basically going to be 50% off, I think. So, a bargain for all the knowledge that is being bestowed on all of us by these cats tonight. So it's a real honor to have them here. And I'm excited to have this course come out and put it all together. Once again, anybody has any questions for our next artist, make sure you drop them in the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. But our next artist, he's a camper through and through at TrueFire. He has been a TrueFire educator for many years, has dozens of TrueFire courses out. Is certainly, one of our favorite people. And certainly I know one of our students' favorite educators, and certainly teaches amazing stuff, can play so much amazing stuff, and is also a great teacher of breaking things down, has lots of courses, has an incredibly popular TrueFire channel as well. So without further ado, let's bring him on. He's been waiting in the green room long enough. He's ate all the peanuts. He's ready to rock. Frank, what's going on, brother?
How are you, Jeff? Hello out there, everyone. Great to see everyone out there in cyber world.
Absolutely. We're doing good, man. How about yourself? Are you hanging in there?
Fabulous. It's way past my bedtime, but that's okay. Well worth it. Coffee.
Absolutely. I know we kept you up late for this one, so we got another log on the fire. We're going to tell some scary ghost stories here at camp later on.
But those late sets we used to play, remember?
Yeah.
Wow.
When you used to play sets, right? Basically.
Right, yeah, I remember that. Wow.
Well, awesome, Frank. Well, we've been talking about jazz blues all night, and you have several jazz blues courses at TrueFire, and something that you sort of specialize in is taking blues stuff and making it jazzy. I know you always like to talk about the fact that there's a little blues in every jazz thing. So, we're going to go over some of the variations, but let's talk about the original lesson that you had, that everybody should have here. You're going to talk about the 2/5 kind of stuff, right?
Correct. The idea of this lesson was to kind of mix your regular blues with the 2/5 sounds that jazz has been known for, and there's a lot of 2/5 sound in jazz. So that first chorus that we went over there, that's your basic concept. And then when we go from B flat 7 to the E flat, we use the leading into the thing. So the whole, theme of this lesson, 2 choruses, was mixing the blues with the more traditional 2/5 style jazz.
Very cool. And you've basically, put together some variations kind of based on that original lesson. Now, once again, everybody that RSVP'd, everybody who's watching right now, they have access to that original lesson, so they can dig into that and check it out. But what are you doing in the first variation? Tell us about that. Tell us kind of how you approached, the first one.
The first of the new variations?
Of the new variations, yeah.
Okay, well, I tried to come up with a concept that's used pretty often in jazz based on the 2-5. Now, just a kind of a recap of the 2-5. If you have a B flat 7 or a dominant 7 chord, in this case it's a B flat 7, you can always use the 2 chord 2, 5, 1. So your notes of your 2-5 are F, there's your triad, F minor, F, A flat, and C. Now stay with me here. If we look at those notes against your B flat 7, 1, 3, 5, there is the F, there's the A flat, which is the flat 7 now of B flat 7, your 9th, which is the 5th of F minor. Now if we continue up, the minor 7th of F minor, and we go one more, the minor 9. It's a great sound. It's a sound in jazz that you hear a lot. The minor 9 to the B flat 13 in this case, to the E flat 9. So the first variation and all of the variations are based on this minor 9 arpeggio. And the way I did it was gave a little lick. And that's some great little blues licks there. Right? Using the 4, flat 3 to the regular 3. It's Charlie Christian right there. Right? So that's the first lick of the concept 1, I called it, the minor 9 arpeggio. And then again. Right? I mean, we're going to watch this now, right? So I should really break it down afterwards. Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Let's watch and see. We'll take a look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Sounds great. So break that down for us. Show us what's going on there.
Okay, well, again, it's the starting with the minor 9, and I use the ba ba da da bam, So I mix the minor 9 arpeggio with the little Charlie Christian 4 flat 3 regular 3 1. And that rhythm fits that groove too, because you have that cool rhythm guitar part at the beginning, right, where he does that. So it's kind of like that's the beginning statement, and it's a good answer. And then I answered it. Instead of going down, I went up. It's kind of like a composing technique where you play an idea, musical statement, then you answer it with something similar with a different ending. Okay, now in the original concepts, I started with bluesy licks and then went to the 2/5. But in this case, I thought it would be good to show starting with the 2/5, and then when you hit the 4 chord, the E flat 9, then I did a classic. That's a classic kind of bebop blues, Kenny Burrell style. That's, you know, that's real kind of jazz blues playing right there, bebop style. And then back to the original idea. Right? Now we get to the F chord. So what I did was, again, the minor 9 arpeggio. C minor 9. Resolving on the 3rd of F7, the A note. And that lick sounds like this. Again, a classic bebop guitar sounding lick, because it's really a great position for the guitar. It just lays so nice. And there's your minor 9 arpeggio. Resolving to the 3rd of F7th, and then down a whole step to the E flat 9, and then the blues. That's like B.B. King style, real, you know, real bluesy, using the 6th. You hear that? That's a real kind of swing blues sound, Charlie Christian style. Okay, so the way to, for me, it all gets down to, okay, it's a cool lick, it's a cool riff, but wow, that's kind of tricky to play, you know? So what do? You practice slow. You take that first riff really slow. Try to sing it. 1. Over and over again. And make sure you practice that. You do that for 5 minutes a day. In a week, you're going to have that riff. Okay? Internalized. And that's what you want. You don't just want to regurgitate the information. You want to take this good piece of information, the minor 9 arpeggio, and really internalize it so you can access it at any time when you're playing the blues. Okay, so this was a real good example of, again, that minor 9 arpeggio mixed with the blues. I'll play it in tempo. 1, 2, 3. Blues. Now that riff, let's just talk about that for a second, because there's a couple of ways you can do something like, you could bend in there. make these riffs your own. Steal them and make them your own. Put your own notes with the same rhythm. No matter what notes you put in there, it's a great rhythm. So a lot of times it's good to steal the phrasing and then put your own notes to it. So these are just little tips to, kind of help you take this solo and really do something with it beyond just regurgitate the information.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's do a couple questions. You up for a couple questions?
Of course. I live
All
my
right.
life answering questions.
So tell us or show us some stuff or tell us some stuff that the great horn players that you've played with has shown you. What have you learned from some of the great horn players you've played with?
Wow. Well, the importance of learning the lyrics. The most influential tenor saxophone player, horn player I've ever played with was Billy Mitchell. Now, many of you probably don't know his name, but he was kind of the elder statesman of the Detroit jazz scene. Tommy Flanagan, Thad Jones, Elvin Jones, John Coltrane, Paul Chambers, Shadow Wilson, a whole group of bebop guys. And when I first met him, I was terrified because I was a real traditional style jazz guitar player. One of the few at the time. Everybody was into bebop and Pat Metheny, and I was like Django and Charlie Christian, So when I first sat in with this guy, I was really kind of scared to death, to be honest with you, because he was famous for yelling at people if they didn't play right. So I just played my little Freddie Green. This guy fell in love with me. I played all the songs he knew. I researched the songs he liked to play. So he said, what do you want to play? And I would say, how about Just in Time? And he would play it. And he would know the lyrics to every song. He would know the verse to every song. So he would just play the melody so beautifully. And it was just such a lesson to me in, even though you're a bebop saxophone player, the importance of the melody, and the more of the elder statesmen that I had the great fortune of playing with, they were all about melody, songs, not Dorian modes, very interesting and very eye-opening for me. And when someone would sit in with us, and if they didn't play the melody, they would get yelled at. Play the melody. The guy would yell at them, play the melody. I was like, whoa, another reminder of how important songs are.
Right.
And this guy knew thousands of songs. And John Coltrane knew thousands of songs too, even though he took his music to another level, but he still knew all the standards. I remember talking to John Schofield about this. His favorite guitar player is Eddie Lang from 1928. The guy's a big Eddie Lang, Lonnie Johnson fan. He knows a zillion standards. Same with Pat Metheny. So it's, it's really important. The tradition, I guess, is what I learned from the most important thing I learned from a horn player.
Very good answer, Frank. Okay, let's do one more question before we jump into another variation. What three things do you wish students would bring to the table before studying with you?
What three? Money.
Absolutely, money. That would be my first one.
Right. Let me give that a little bit of thought. Well, first of all, a desire to learn. Because, 95% of students are really eager to learn. 5% of them want to tell you how much they know. Which is fine by me, but, the desire to learn, to really want to listen to what the teacher has to say and try to grasp their pedagogy. Number two is just 20 minutes a day commitment to practice. You don't need 5 hours a day. You don't need 2 hours a day. 20 minutes a day on good, serious practice. If you have that kind of time, you can really grow over the course of 6 months to a year. And that, I would say, would be the final thing of the three, is just, give me 6 months. Give me a little time. People think there's a secret, like, oh, if I take a month lesson with Frank, boy, I'm going to know how to play just great. It's not that easy. It's really a commitment. It's a time commitment and a desire. So those are the three things. I mean, I have some beginners that I love teaching beginners. I have one guy now, and he's playing at the jam. Well, but when we had the jams, but he was coming each month to these jam sessions we would have, and he was playing. He's playing melodies now. It's like, wow, what a great thing, because he had the desire. And that's all I look for in students, those three things.
Perfect. Good stuff. And a little money never hurts.
Ah, right, of course. That was a joke. A bad joke.
All right, so let's talk about your second variation. We did the minor ninth arpeggio, and now the second variation, what are you going to do in here?
Well, it's the same concept with the minor ninth arpeggio, except we're going to add chromatics. Now, I think it's really important to look at the chromatic scale. It's the mother scale. It's all 12 notes, and every scale is derived, every pattern, all of music is derived from those 12 notes. So it's important to look at the notes in between the chord tones and also in between the upper extensions, hence the minor ninth. So we'll take a listen and then we'll break it down.
Sounds great. Very cool.
Yeah.
So
right.
yeah, let's take a look at that. Show us what you're doing, what you're adding in there.
Well, the first variation, right, was the minor non arpeggio. So here we started with this one, and there are the two chord tones, the ninth and the minor seven, and there are the notes between it. So we're adding those chromatics and then write down the arpeggio. 1, 2. That's ascending. Again, those chromatic notes. You've heard the expression all 12 notes work over every chord. Well, they do. It's where you land. I don't want to go on this chord. I don't want to land on that note, but it sounds great when you use it as a passing tone. And then I answered it. Ba-do-do-do, ba-boo-dum, ba-boo-dum, T for two, ba-da-da-da-da-da, ba-ba-da, right? That's that sound. So that's a good scale to practice if you want to write this down. That's a great pattern, scale, whatever you would call it. Okay, so the first line, 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Now the E flat 9. I'm going to play some blues. We did that the first time. Now watch this. See that one little note. Right? That's blues. And that's jazz. Because without blues, there's no jazz. Especially when you're playing blues. If you 2-5 it to death, you're going to sound like an exercise book. You gotta put some blues in there. Right, ended on the boom. Now watch this, how I take this. You see that? See that all the way down. Now look at this. 1, 3, 5. All the notes in between the chord tones. You can make up all kinds of stuff just with that. Between the 5 and the 7. Okay, so that's getting back to using chromatics. And again, it's where you end the phrase. I'm not going to end the phrase on a B flat 7 chord on a B note. Yet, tension and release. So chromatics, very, very important. Now, let's look at the, right? Remember in the first one we did that. Now we're taking, again, we're taking that 9th chromatically down to the flat 7th, down the arpeggio, and then a little ending of a phrase. Ba-boo-da, again, using chromatics. It's only one, 3 notes, but it's chromatics nonetheless. Then down. And then back to the blues to end the phrase. Bend that. Remember, when you bend, use all 3 fingers for strength. If you try to do it just with your 3rd finger, you're never going to get it. So you use all 3 for strength. And that's a wound G, and I'm able to bend that. Right? So again, the combination of that minor 9 sound, chromatics, connecting the chord tones, not just randomly used, ending phrases on chord tones, and then mixing it with some good old-fashioned blues playing. So that's the concept for number two is just, how important those chromatics are and how good they can sound.
Very cool. They sound great. Sounds awesome when you add those in there. And you're just adding a little bit. So you're starting with the original concept and then just building a little bit, right? Adding a little bit to it.
Correct. I mean, essentially, this could be kind of two choruses of a blues, like
Right.
chorus one and then chorus two is kind of similar, but you start going in a little different direction with the chromatics.
Yeah, that's perfect. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just add to what you've already done.
That's it. The mother scale.
Very cool. All right, let's do a couple questions. Got a question here. Someone noticed that during the variations, sometimes you're using all downstrokes for some of the lines, and sometimes it's a combination of up and downstrokes. So what's your rationale and how do you determine that?
I tend to use mostly downstrokes. A la Charlie Christian, George Barnes, both used exclusively downstrokes. Why? Because I feel like I can control my sound more. That's the only reason why. Now, I want to preface all of this by saying that I've played with a lot of guitar players, from Les Paul all the way down. And every one of them picks differently. Every one of them holds their pick differently, their hand differently. Some guys go all down, some guys go down, up, down, 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 some guys go down, up, down, up, down, up. Pat Martino goes like this, all wrong, yet he's the cleanest bebop player on the planet. Go figure. So whatever is comfortable is what you should go for. I just want to preface this whole thing. There's no right or wrong way to pick. So now, down picking. That's kind of what I do, all down. And then if I do down up, it's down, and on an upbeat, it's an up pick. It's down, up, down, up. If it's an upbeat, it's an up pick. If it's a down, it's a down pick. I've tried all kinds of hybrid picking and, this thing where you go down, up, down, and if you're going to go down again, you go down, no matter if it's an upbeat or a downbeat. That doesn't work for me. So if I do alternate picking, downbeat is a downstroke and an upbeat is an upstroke. It's just the way I feel it. But ever since I had a couple surgeries on my arm, I found the down picking too, being able to give myself some leverage here. So that's why now I really do a lot of down pick. It's just because now I have a place that I could, hold on to here because I can't feel my fingertips. So that gives me a grounding point. So that's why I kind of developed the picking style I have now, is just because I need an anchor or else my hand goes all over the place. So that's another reason for the all down picks. But again, I feel like I can control my sound better too. Like when I hit a downstroke, I know that sound. And I think that's a very important thing that we have to remember as guitar players. What do we want to sound like? What do we want this beautiful instrument we buy and that killer amplifier and that unbelievable monster cable that cost us $75 to get the cleanest sound? But what are we hearing in our head that we want our guitar to sound like? That's really a question we need to ask ourselves. Just get a kind of an idea of what kind of tone we want. It's not the guitar, it's in the hands. Okay, the guitar can help, an amp can help, obviously, but I've heard guitar players who pick up anybody's guitar and sound like themselves on it because they know the sound they want to get. So just give a little thought to that, and I guarantee it'll help your tone.
Very good, very good. So let's do another question. We got another question that says, do you consciously avoid passing tones on the beat? Or is it just so quick that it's not an issue and you put passing tones wherever?
On landing beats. What I mean by that is if you're like in this example, well, I guess they are on the beat. I've never quite thought about it, but interestingly enough, yeah, on a downbeat, you're usually trying to come to have a chord tone. I guess that's a very good point. But I don't, I guess, exclusively, because if... So right there, I'm starting it on a C sharp. You see that? So it is a downbeat. And if you just hit that note, it sounds like, oh, oops, but. So I would say most of the time, yes, but there are occasions where, you know, it's the wrong note on the downbeat, but it sounds right because it's part of the whole phrase.
Got it. Good. Made you think about that anyway.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah. Very our students are pretty observant, you know. They dig in, as you well know.
They wouldn't be up this late if they weren't interested, that's for sure.
All right. Well, let's talk about your third variation. So what are you doing in the third variation?
Now, the third variation, I add the 1, 2, 3 arpeggio, which I kind of really like. If you just look at the 1, 2, 3 arpeggio, say B flat, right? It already sounds like something. Right now, if we take it with the 2 chord, 1, 2, 3, 5. And then end the phrase with that minor 9. You see how that sounds really nice? It's a great way to get started using arpeggios instead of just all the time hitting just the arpeggio. It sounds like a musical line already. And then mixing it with the blues. So that's the concept. Let's take a listen and then we can break it down.
Yeah. Nice.
I love that.
So break that down for us. Show us what you're doing there.
Well, I really had fun with this one, by the way. This was, I think, the most fun I had writing a blues line in a long time. Okay, that once again is the 1, 2, 3, 5. and then running up the minor 9 arpeggio. 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9. And the phrase. Then again. Okay, good way to practice this. Ba, ba, boo, ba, nice and slow. Boo, ba, boo, da, boo, ba, ba. Try to sing it. Ba, boo, ba, doo, doo. This is the way to practice. Ba, ba, boo, ba. Boo, ba, boo, da, boo, ba, ba. Ba, ba, boo, ba, boo, doo. Okay, again, it's good to practice in these little chunks. Just get that down. If you have to, take a whole week just to get that. Don't look at this overall thing and get overwhelmed. One little piece at a time. Okay, then we hit the E flat 9. Again, the minor 9 using the 1, 2, 3, then up the minor 9. And then ba-doo-doo-doo-doo. Together it sounds like this. Again, great jazz phrasing. Typical, common jazz phrasing. Ba-boo-doo-doo-doo. 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 So ba-ba-boo-boo, ba-boo-doo-boo. Ba-doo-doo-doo-doo. Right? Now, back to all about the 1, 2, 3, and then up the minor 9 arpeggio. All of that up to there was all 1, 2, 3 arpeggio, then minor 9. Okay? Now, once again, F9, we go up the minor. And this was a kind of a cool phrasing. Ba, ba, boo, boo, ba, ba, boo, ba. Ba, 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 ba. Okay, rhythm. It's the part we have to work on, probably the most, because as guitar players, we work a lot on technique and a lot on scales. We don't work enough on rhythms, common jazz rhythms. The more rhythms we know, we could put our own notes to it. That's not the issue. The issue is the phrasing, you know, the swinging phrasing. So here's a great phrase. Ba, 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 ba. Again, that's the, okay, if we put it into an exercise sound, now, always have to add the blues, and this is one of my favorite licks, because I'm a big Bob Marley fan. Doesn't get any cooler than that, in my humble opinion, because that is like, that's the blues right there, right? So you always have to add some blues when you're playing the blues anytime in jazz. So there's a great example of how you can take these classic licks and everything you learn, whether it's these little exercises or anything you learn from someone, you need to internalize it, and then what I say is steal it. Steal the rhythm, change a note here and there to make it your own. This is how you create your own little toolbox of unique sounding riffs, is through these kind of concepts. Taking one minor 9 arpeggio concept, and I could write 25 different concepts. You know, what I'm trying to relay to you and teach you is how to take this minor 9 concept and turn it into some music. And I think that's the key for all theory, is you have to play it, you have to, you know, use everything you know and what that you've learned, rhythms, you know, and use the concepts and apply them, not just play them as scales or play them as arpeggios and studies. So this is a good way to do it, just to try to make good musical sounding ideas using the concepts.
Very good, Frank. Awesome, man. So people, just a lot of folks are digging this and really have had a lot of good questions. A lot of people loving what you're teaching. So here's a question for you. If you've got a player, you've got a student who can play some blues, right? They can get through a 12-bar blues with basic chords. They can play a little pentatonic soloing. What would you say would be the first thing, the number one thing that they should do to start to be able to play, you know, kind of what we're calling jazz blues, right? To add a little jazz flavor to that regular blues.
I think the first thing you do is you combine the minor pentatonic, right? Your blues scale. You have your minor pentatonic, and then your major pentatonic. I think it's usually played like this. Right? So I call it the Charlie Christian scale. I just did a lesson with this in my practice session, actually. Instead of that or just playing that, you combine them. Starts to sound like more like jazz, like swing. You start to put some swing in it. And I think that's what was so great about Charlie Christian, is that he was like kind of the first one to, you know, be the blues guy that played, you know, the 9th and the 6th. And then John Hammond put him and Benny Goodman together, and it was magic, absolute magic, really the beginning of electric jazz guitar as we know it today. Another great duet that everybody should listen to is getting into jazz blues is Eddie Lang and Lonnie Johnson. Now Eddie Lang had to call himself Blind Willie Dunn because blacks and whites couldn't record together in the late 1920s. So he called himself Blind Willie Dunn and recorded with his hero, Lonnie Johnson, and those duets are spectacular. I mean, they don't sound dated, and it's a lot of... If it was played now and you heard it played, you'd be like, oh my God, these guys are the greatest thing ever. And it was done in 1928. So I think that's a key if you want to get into learning jazz guitar, jazz blues, expand a little bit. Don't start with John Coltrane. Start with Charlie Christian. That's the guy to start with because he really brought jazz and blues together. So that's a great place to start. And that Charlie Christian scale, I think, is a great place to start because it takes you out of your basic blues pentatonic.
Great answer, man. That is, I think, something that's really needed for a lot of students that, you know, sometimes hear jazz blues and it's like, oh my gosh, there's a lot going on, and they don't know what's happening in there. So, you know, you've done a good job breaking it down tonight, and I think that last bit of advice is really good, you know, for those folks. So I know we could go on all night, but then we wouldn't get any sleep, right?
Oh, great.
So we don't want to do that. But thank you for being here, Frank, as always. Everybody watching, go check out Frank's courses. So many great courses at TrueFire. And of course, his channel is, a smoking hot channel that's just a ton of information. Frank is literally in there every day answering questions and posting content weekly and practically daily in there. So
now all the subscribers get a weekly Zoom practice session. Every Sunday at 2 o'clock, I hold a 30-minute practice session.
Absolutely.
So practice scales and little things together, and people love it.
Yeah. Yeah, so good stuff. So go check that out. And for everyone watching, look, how could you not love the stuff that you've seen here tonight? Well, from these three amazing educators, go hit the pre-order button. You'll pre-order this. Once this course comes out, you can download it. You'll have it forever for your lifetime. And it might take a lifetime to learn all the stuff that these three guys are talking about, but it's good stuff you can reference over and over. Well, you'll have tab, all the jam tracks, and basically all the stuff there. So go hit the pre-order button, because that's for you guys here, because you're watching right now, because you're here live. You can pre-order that and get it like for 50% off. So crazy good deal to do that. So make that happen. But Frank, thank you again for being here. As always, my friend, we hope to get you back, get you back down at TrueFire.
Yep, really. Thanks for all the support, everyone out there. It's meant a lot to all of us to have you, to communicate with you in the last 6 months, especially because we have to play. We have to communicate our talents, or else we go crazy as musicians. So
absolutely. Well, you're always welcome to come hang out here online with us.
Anytime.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So everyone, that's Frank. Earlier you saw Tim Lerch, David Hamburger kick that off. I mean, three amazing players, but I think, three amazing educators, which is the really cool thing about it, right? These are not just guys that are just shredders and they play great. These are guys that really understand what they're doing, and more importantly, understand how to communicate that to everyone else, so we can check it out and learn from there. So it was a great learning experience. I had a great time. I hope all of you did. We're going to be doing a lot more camps, so stay tuned for that. Now go zip up your tents, hit the sack, because it's early rise tomorrow morning for a kayak trip. So we'll be doing that, but have fun, guys. I am Jeff Sheets from TrueFire. You've been watching the TrueFire Jazz Blues Camp, and we will see you at the next camp.